This is Luke Vaughn with Sachs Realty, and today I'm sitting in with Todd Sachs, and today I'm going to answer the most frequently asked questions that I get from people that are buying a home.
All right, so Luke, let's talk about one thing that people ask all the time is, where do I begin?
That is a question that I often get, that I always like to answer with, get pre-approved, right? Sometimes people want to look at houses that might be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 specifically out of their price range, right? And the last thing you want to do is walk through a house, check something out, fall in love with it, try and get pre-approved for it, or submit an offer, and you simply can't afford the payments. You know, that can be somewhat heartbreaking to a first-time home buyer or somebody that's, planning their life, or, getting either a lease might be ending, whatever, and they're in a specified timeline. That can often be detrimental to the home buying process.
And plus, it's a waste of time.
Absolutely.
For everybody involved.
No doubt.
So, what do you do, Luke? How do you tell them? I mean, a lot of times people don't even have a loan officer in mind.
Right. I get that all the time. In fact, more often than not. Sometimes they don't even know, especially with first-time home buyers, they don't even know what a loan officer is, which is okay. I mean, most people don't, right? When you're buying your first house, it's, undisclosed information that's just never been talked about to them. What I always like to do is I recommend 3 loan officers that they can go and talk to and feel comfortable with. That way they can pick the one that's the best fit and has the best programs for them specifically.
The process doesn't take very long. Usually it's just a phone call to get things started.
Right. It can take a few hours. And, a lot of, and I wanted to touch on this too, something that I get all the time is, I'm not ready to buy a house. I'm not ready, but I want to do that in 6 to 9 months. Well, what's great with the loan officers that I have, and I always recommend, is they have credit repair programs, right? So if your credit isn't perfect, they can plan strategically how to get you in a position to buy a home in a year or 6 months or 9 months, whatever your timeline ends up being.
Yeah, and certainly, even for people that have, you talk about credit repair. So one of the things that we see a lot, especially since we just had a major downturn, and a lot of people have lost their homes. They're coming up on that maybe 8-9 years that since they had their home foreclosed. So they did have a lot of damage to their credit. There is a way to buy a home again. So if we want to boil it down into the first step being, yes, getting pre-approved, but it's really about, knowing where you want to be as well.
What I find that happens every so often is people tell me they want to be in a specific neighborhood or area of town, usually somewhere surrounding the Baltimore County area. It's where I do a lot of my business. And they might say, I'd love to be in X neighborhood or Z neighborhood. And then as we continually look at houses, we find that maybe they want to be on the other side of town. Maybe it makes more sense for them and their spouse, or just themselves, if they're buying a house by themselves, to be somewhat farther away from their job if they can afford a different house or a different style house or something like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because a lot of times they'll say, I want to be close to work or within 30 minutes drive time of a certain area, but it really is important that they find that out on their own.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's I can remember several instances when I was selling where you would get somebody that would give you 4 or 5 different zip codes.
Right.
And, I always said, what, guys, you got to ride around. You need to narrow it down.
Absolutely.
For me. I mean, I can't, you can't be scouring 30, 40 minutes drive time in every direction. So they really need to pick what part of town they want to be in, or at least maybe a couple different areas, but they have to be pretty specific.
And that can take some time, right? Sometimes it does take, going to some of these houses and checking them out and checking out the neighborhoods to say, I'd rather be here, or maybe not.
Definitely. So also, let's touch base on, what people should expect. And, every broker does things kind of different, right? Or has different procedures in place. But for us, we're really specific. So why don't you just talk about, those 3 steps that we encourage during that initial consultation, sort of figuring it all out.
So people text me from time to time and say, hey, look at this house, let's go see it, right? Especially first-time home buyers, they just don't know the process. Once again, that's okay. You're not expected to. But what I always like to encourage is, let's have a sit-down, face-to-face meeting. Let's talk about what you're looking for, right? So that way we're not checking one house out and checking something else out that doesn't financially make sense, right? Or B, doesn't make sense because it's not in close proximity to your job or to your gym or your church or wherever specifically that you want to be.
And it's really about maximizing time, and it's even especially for the buyers, not just for us, but we're busy, and we want to absolutely do the best job that we can and save the buyer a lot of time as much as possible. So it is important when we're sitting down at that first face-to-face, we're getting to know them a little bit, what their goals are, finding out if they've been looking for specific neighborhoods, styles of houses, what needs they have, and whether they've been pre-approved or pre-qualified for a set amount of money. And then if not, then that's when we really kind of spring into action and get them the referrals so that they can talk to those loan officers and find out what they're comfortable with spending.
Sure. And I think a lot of times we see people that are just nervous about meeting with an agent, and not at a house or whatever. And those are the people that sometimes aren't serious, right? If they just want to jump in a car, go look at a house and they're not comfortable with sitting down for you for 10, 15 minutes, you probably don't want them as a client anyway.
Pretty big purchase. So if you don't
Correct.
have time to sit down with a professional for a half an hour before you actually go and look at properties, even if you're going to look at properties that same day,
Absolutely.
that's okay. But let's sit down a little bit ahead of time, get all our, questions asked and have an opportunity to answer some questions. One of the questions that we get a lot of times is, how long does it take to buy? What's that process like? When should I start looking if I want to settle by a certain date?
Sure. So I think the depending on what your market's like.
Let's just talk about best case scenarios.
Okay, best case scenario. So let's say you find a house specifically one weekend, right? Let's say you find it by a Saturday. Chances are, if you submit a contract, as once again, that's my job to help you with and walk you through, and I'll help you understand the contract. Submit it the following day or that day. If not, you can expect probably 24 to 48 hours turnaround time from the seller. Every situation is different depending on whether it's an estate sale or siblings or they're out of town, whatever it could be. But you can expect anywhere from 24 to 48 hours to go officially under contract. And from that time forward, typically with the loan programs that are in place today, FHA and conventional, we see roughly 30 to 45 days until you're moving in and signing the paperwork on your new home.
Right now, I know it's a seller's market.
Sure.
So at least in our geographical footprint, houses that are move-in ready, that are priced right, are selling very fast.
What I always tell people is typically it means there's not a lot of inventory, which simply put means there's not a lot of houses for sale, right? So if there's a set amount of buyers, let's say there's 100 buyers and there's 75 houses, right? These are just basic numbers for ease, right? But let's say there's 100 buyers, 75 houses. Chances are you're not going to be in a situation where the first offer gets accepted, right? Sellers might push back a little bit because they know that that it will sell. There are buyers out there for that specific house, which can at times drive the prices up.
So let's talk about money down. I know we're not loan officers, and we work with a lot of professionals that certainly do a great job for our clients. But I know one of the questions that gets asked a lot is, how much money do I need down?
So I had a friend come to me just the other day. He's like, Luke, I've got $35,000, $40,000 in the bank. I want to purchase a house, but I want to save a little bit more. And I told him, look, you can purchase a home with very little money down, significantly less than that figure, depending on where you're looking, neighborhoods, and what loan program you choose to use. And there's also what's called Seller's Assist, where the sellers can actually help negate some of your closing costs by giving you what's called a seller's concession at closing. And a couple along with that, another question I do get is, Luke, my credit isn't perfect. What am I supposed to do? I really do want to buy a house in the next 9 months, year, whatever. It really doesn't have to be tremendous. It doesn't have to be perfect. Depends on your situation. I would recommend just talking to a loan officer first. And as we touched on earlier, right, they have credit repair systems that can help improve your credit over time. Another question is regarding the home inspection. This is something I always recommend to any one of my clients, depending on whether it's an $80,000 house or a $700,000 house. It's something that protects you. you can make the contract contingent upon. So for instance, if you find something in that home inspection that you don't like or not comfortable with, you can always make that contract null and void or ask to have it repaired or replaced depending on what it is, obviously by the seller. And it just adds a little blanket of security just in case, like I said, you're not comfortable with moving forward in the transaction. So if you have any more questions about buying a home or buying your first home, please contact me, Luke Bond, Sachs Realty, 410-807-2610, or you can email me at lb@sachsrealty.com.
Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.